Welcome back to a Book a Day podcast. In the previous few episodes, I've been taking you on a literary journey rather, throughout India. We've been to the north. Now, let's go to the quiet corners of South India. And the book that I've got with me today is called Three Quarters of a Footprint. The book was published in 1994, written by Joe Roberts, by a man who traveled through India in the 1970s and 80s, and he had a mixture of curiosity, self-mockery, because of which you get humor in his writing, and also a strange mix of tenderness. That's Three Quarters of a Footprint for you. It's not a travel book in the conventional sense. It's not a reportage. It's not a memoir. It is something in between. It's a kind of a record of an outsider who stayed long enough in India to stop being an observer and has kind of become a part of it, part of India. And that's the advantage he possesses. He looks at India with something in between. It's not the eyes of an outsider nor the insider. It's something in between. And I think that's probably because Joe Roberts arrived in India without having any certainty about it or any exotic ideas about India. And he came here with the kind of openness. And I think that's what makes his writing unusual. He makes observations, and at the same time, he doesn't pretend to understand the country. He remains open, and he gets surprised by India quite often. But he presents such a clear picture that you begin to understand the country better. And in this episode, the parts of the book that I'm going to narrate here, some passages, are from one of my favorite cities in the country. It's called Pondicherry. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. It's pretty much in the southern tip of India, and it's a beautiful city. It has the colonial past, but unlike most of India, which had the British colonial past, it has the French colonial past. And you'll understand that as we read the descriptions. So let me read a few passages from the book before we continue our discussion. Pondicherry, at least the part that's called Ville Blanche, was laid out exactly like a small French town. The street signs were in French, and the buildings were more vernacular French than colonial. The remaining British buildings to be found in cities like Bangalore would certainly look strange in England. A distinct colonial style had developed very early on in domestic architecture, and even the offices and government buildings were different in scale and material, whereas the French buildings of Pondicherry seemed practically identical to buildings in France. It was a strikingly clean city. I did not see any cows or pie dogs. The rickshawalas wore straw hats like the Vietnamese. There were a few elderly French people, obviously residents, sitting outside, their little dogs also elderly, poodles or dachshunds on leads. Tree-lined squares, benches under shade trees. Along the Rue de la Caserne to the seafront. An expanse of beach, a long pier. Out on the horizon, big white tankers. I went to the Integral guest house at the end of the Avenue Gobert, opposite the Orléans Français, where a painted board advertised a season of classic French films and language courses at different levels. The guest house belonged to the Sri Aurobindo ashram, but anyone could stay there. My room overlooked the beach. There was a balcony and a good breeze away from which it was baking. There was a portrait of Sri Aurobindo on the wall. He looked like an Old Testament prophet. I walked down to the refectory, a room that was built right onto the sea wall. A languid woman in a white smock served me. She had stepped out of a Gauguin painting. The other guests were mostly Europeans, lots of French people. Quite a few were followers of Aurobindo wearing white Indian clothes, bourgeoisie couple who had been young in the 1960s, one or two children. A black American wearing crimson and orange clothes, a follower of Sri Bhagwan Rajneesh, was chatting in English with a Nordic couple, both flaxen haired and pinkly sunburned. The Nordic man had a crew cut and one thick rope, a single yellow dreadlock like a battered corn dolly growing at the back. The American had a sing-song voice. I heard him saying, "You take in all the protein you need from pulses. Let the cows be." It was like the dining room of a school, and the menu was a blend of Southern Indian and European wholemeal. The coffee was good, no doubt, due to the French influence. The table next to the salt and pepper was a quotation from either the mother or Aurobindo. I was reminded of Khalil Gibran, Alan Watts, or Desiderata. That same quasi mystical, highfalutin tone and the tang, however faint, of charlatanry. Or perhaps it was my reaction, not quite cynicism, but a wariness that sprang up like an electronic fence whenever I felt that the great, unfathomable mysteries were being brushed off with a set of platitudes. If you can tell a man by his friends, you can tell a prophet by his followers. I did not get the impression from the devotees in the refectory that much intellectual vigor was required, nor any adjustment of lifestyle. Whatever makes them happy, I thought, let them get on with it. They think they've got the answers. I'm still confused. As you can see, in the passages that I read so far, Roberts is questioning. He's questioning himself. He's making observations. And he's deeply aware of the dangers of writing about India. He knows this long tradition of Western travel writing, in which you will find this oversized confidence among all those writers. There come judgments on a country they barely know. And in this case, however, you find that tone is almost a counter gesture. Instead of telling you what India is, he keeps showing how India forces him to confront the reality. So I think that's the kind of humility he possesses. And is willing to admit his mistakes. He is willing to acknowledge his flaws, his limitations. And there's a constant dialogue going on within himself. And that makes his writing really reflective. There's a section early in the book where the author reflects on the word seeking, because the word is so overused in Western accounts of India that it has kind of lost its meaning. And Roberts knows this. So he mocks his own seeking, and yet he cannot deny that something in India does unsettle him enough to make him look closer. Another thing that I like about his writing is the details, the specific details he gets into. Let me read a passage and you will understand what I'm trying to say. How he describes the details of what he's seeing, what he's observing, and how clearly he paints the picture in front of you. Let me read now and you'll get the idea. At sunset, I was joined by a girl from Wolverhampton. Her name was Rachel, and she was a stout, dark girl in her late teens. She had a vaguely Ursinine manner, perhaps more badger than bear, that was accentuated by her muscular, hairy limbs and quick black eyes. She was going to study fashion design at Brighton. That surprised me because her whole appearance suggested a more down to earth career. I would have guessed that she was a chemistry student. She had been traveling around India with her boyfriend Matthew and another traveler that they had teamed up with in Rajasthan. When she told me that, I realized how much of a loner I had become. I'd never have considered teaming up with anyone. It wasn't unfriendliness, it just hadn't occurred to me. Rachel, in turn, was amazed to hear that I had been staying with Indian families. Matthew had decided that India was fine, the problem was the people. She tended to agree. They were so dishonest. Eric, their friend, got on better with them than they did. He was older than Matthew and Rachel and had been to India before. We arrived at LP in the dark. St. George's lodging was supposed to be good value. A single room with an attached bathroom was only 25 rupees a night. The three of them decided to stay there as well. Matthew was tall with a chubby smiley face. He was dressed in surfer fashion, at least an English fashion chain's notion of surfer fashion. A t-shirt with the logo Fat Willie on it, gaudy baggy shorts, and checked Vans. Eric was my age, a sunburnt Scot. He had red hair tied in a neat ponytail and carried his luggage about on a foldable trolley. He was an actor and drama therapist. We set off towards the lodge using the map in the Lonely Planet. As we approached the town centre, we discovered that a parade to celebrate Onam was about to take place. St. George's lodging was the top 3 floors of a large city block. There was a sign at the top of the stairs, "Your home away from sweet home." We signed in and were told that dinner was unavailable, so we decided to find somewhere to eat in town after we had dumped our bags. I was just being shown to my room when there was a power cut. The bearer went back to reception to get a candle. What I saw of the room appealed to me, a monk's cell. Outside, the whole city had blacked out. People had gathered along the pavements to watch the parade. The only available lighting came from torches and candles, but it went ahead anyway, a ghostly procession that ought to have been merry with bright yellow flags waving. The marchers, most of whom seemed to be from trade unions, trooped cautiously along like a jungle platoon behind enemy lines. Very few of the banners that one could read were in English, but the whole thing appeared to typify the Keralan melange of left-wing politics and religion. Eric thought that there might be power nearer the jetty, so we went back to the way that we came. The streets got more and more crowded. There were several drunks. By and large, a drunken Indian is nothing to worry about. Alcohol brings out a floppy silliness, that's all. One rarely comes across the confused and pent-up fury that can make a northern European drunk so threatening. But as we pushed our way through, one young man lurched forward to put his hand on Rachel's breast. It looked to me as if he was trying to steady himself more than molest her, but it was hard to tell. Rachel's immediate reaction was to strike him across the face. The man was so plastered that her slap knocked him over. As he lay on the ground, Matthew kicked him in the mouth repeatedly, until blood spouted from his lip and ran down his neck and soaked into the collar of his white shirt. I was shocked. It seemed excessively violent and sickening, out of all proportion to the man's offense. His companions pulled back, as horrified as I was. I muttered to Matthew that he could have just told him off. "Bollocks, I could have," he snapped back. Rachel, trembling, said that it was always happening. They had both reached boiling point. They don't treat their women that way. They're such fucking lechers with white women. As you can see from this instance, there are several such instances, by the way, in the book, that most of these moments in the book, they're not grand revelations. but they are just small recognitions, and from them you can interpret so much about the place, about the people, about the author himself, his own judgments. You can see his own flaws, his own limitations. And through all these understandings, misunderstandings, I think he captures India in a brilliant way. He shows that India is neither spiritual nor chaotic, neither mystical nor incomprehensible. It is just simply there, full of lives unfolding at their own pace, and quite indifferent to the drama that many people bring with themselves. It just goes on. It doesn't care about anything. The chaos or whatever there is in India, it just goes on. And another interesting thing that you would notice that Roberts is not philosophizing too much. He's not turning India into a metaphor. He's just allowing India to remain India, to remain itself. He's not romanticizing the poverty, he's not romanticizing the chaos, the troubles that are coming. And he doesn't pretend to decode the country. He watches, makes his observations, comments, moves on. And there are plenty of conversations in the book. So many conversations. And through those conversations, India reveals itself to you for the reader. And I think that's also brilliant. That you just don't get to see or understand India through the commentary of the writer, but the way it gets revealed by itself in the conversations, that also feels brilliant. And as the book progresses, the author, Roberts, he becomes more aware of how dislocated he is, not only geographically, but also psychologically. And he writes about loneliness. One example that we saw earlier, that he was traveling alone, and he talks about it later. He talks about his loneliness with unusual honesty. And he writes about being lost. And he makes this confession that there is this strange feeling in him of belonging nowhere. And at the same time, he's not just willing to settle down. He's happy exploring and making his observations on the go. And I think that's probably one thing that makes this book really moving. Roberts is not pretending to undergo a grand transformation here. He's just describing and noticing these small shifts, these tiny calibrations in understanding the country, in understanding the human nature. That's all. I remember there's a chapter in which he writes how walking barefoot and how the earth registers his presence. And it registers his presence, but only 3/4 of it. And that's where the title comes from, the 3/4. 3/4 of a footprint. And that's the message here. That no matter how deeply we try to immerse ourselves in a place, some part of us will always remain suspended, kind of alien, kind of unabsorbed. So that's a metaphor for travel, for identity, that even though you're there, you're still not there completely. And that's really the message in the book. And I hope you'll get a chance to read it. And through this book, you will develop a better understanding of the country. Although, as I said earlier, it was published in 1994. Most of the essays, they were written on his journeys during 1970s and 80s. So clearly, much has changed since then. But to understand the essence of human nature or India, it's a really good book. So I hope you'll get a chance to read and you'll enjoy that. As far as I am concerned, I'll move on from my journey across India to some other theme in the next episode, and then we'll explore more books there. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you the next time with more books. Thank you.